She didn't mean for the world to see that photo. Just sunlight on her shoulders, hair undone by lake wind, a small, unguarded smile, the kind that belongs to someone who's finally breathing again. But a single picture, posted without thought, would unravel 3 years of invisibility and touch the life of a man who'd forgotten what warmth felt like. He was her boss, a man who lived behind glass walls and rules until one photo made him remember he was still human. And she, the woman everyone overlooked, was about to learn that being seen could be both beautiful and dangerous. If this story touches your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe now. Let's begin. At 7:12 a.m. The lights on North Rock's 15th floor hummed the same way they always did, an endless, sterile vibration that never quite disappeared. Claire Whitman slipped her security badge through the reader and stepped into the wide, gray corridor. Her heels clicked softly, a familiar metronome marking another day that would look exactly like the one before it. The air smelled faintly of printer toner and reheated coffee. At her cubicle 42 feet from the nearest window, she set down her worn leather bag, hung her cardigan over the chair, and booted up her computer. The monitor glowed, pale blue. Rows of spreadsheets waited, thousands of cells lined up like obedient soldiers. She adjusted her glasses and opened the project ledgers for the Riverstone expansion. Numbers. Always numbers. Claire liked precision. She liked how numbers didn't lie. But lately, even their honesty felt hollow, like talking to someone who answered correctly but never cared. From the hallway came the quick rhythm of expensive shoes. She didn't have to look up to know who it was. Grant Mercer, CEO of North Rock Developments, crossed the office with the focus of a man racing his own heartbeat. He never slowed, never smiled. Just a tall, contained silhouette of wealth and purpose. He passed her row without looking. He always did. Claire's hand stilled on her mouse. A faint, private smile tugged at her lips, parts amusement, part resignation. She had worked here 6 years and could count on one hand the times he'd spoken directly to her. Still, she admired the efficiency, even if it came wrapped in frost. By 8:30, the office was fully awake. Phones buzzed, keyboards tapped in sync. Claire checked invoices, cross-verified numbers, then sent her quiet corrections into the system. No one saw her hand steadying a company's mistakes. That was the nature of her job when you did it perfectly. You disappeared. At 10:04, her phone vibrated beside the calculator, a small, cheerful ping breaking the rhythm of columns and decimals. New post from Hannah. Her sister lived 200 miles north, near 2 harbors. Claire hesitated, thumb hovering above the screen, before she opened it. The photo filled the glass sunlight spilling over the lake like melted gold, waves catching the morning light. And there she was, Claire herself, standing ankle-deep in water, hair loose, a pale sundress fluttering in the breeze. Her shoulders glowed with the faintest trace of tan lines, soft against her skin. The caption read, "She finally let the sun in." Claire exhaled a sound somewhere between a sigh and a laugh. She remembered that weekend how Hannah had dragged her out of her apartment, insisting she needed real light, not the kind that hums above your desk. The air had smelled of pine and salt. The water was shockingly cold, the kind that made you feel alive whether you wanted to or not. For the first time in months, she'd felt color return to her. A small warmth spread through her chest as she looked at the picture. She didn't usually like seeing herself. Mirrors were fine, cameras were not. But this one, it was different, unposed, honest. The woman in that photo looked like someone she might want to befriend. Her phone buzzed again, messages from friends. "You look amazing. Didn't know you liked the beach." She smiled, cheeks heating. Then she set the phone face down beside her keyboard, telling herself she'd look again later. Across the city, 25 floors higher, Grant Mercer's office was all glass and steel. He stood behind his desk, phone in hand, scrolling through news headlines, stock tickers, and company updates. The weekend had left him restless. The silence in his penthouse had echoed too loudly. even for him. A suggested post appeared on his private feed, someone he didn't follow directly, but the algorithm insisted he might know. A woman standing by a lake, sunlight across her face. Something about the photo stilled his thumb mid-scroll. He tapped. The image opened full size. For a heartbeat, he didn't recognize her. She looked too alive for the muted palette of his memory. Then, with a faint jolt, he placed her Claire Whitman at the finance department. 6 years, reliable, efficient, practically invisible. Yet, here barefoot in the shallows, she looked different. The set of her shoulders unburdened, the small, quiet joy in her smile, disarming in its sincerity. Grant's throat tightened unexpectedly. He zoomed in, not quite sure why. The lake shimmered behind her, and along her shoulder a soft line divided the skin, sun-touched against pale, a tiny imperfection that felt absurdly human. He told himself he was only curious, that the composition was good, that the warmth of the photo was what caught him, not the woman, but his pulse betrayed him. He set the phone down, then picked it up again. For a man whose life ran on predictability, the act of pausing twice felt reckless. Back on the 15th floor, Claire closed her laptop lid halfway, her mind still hovering somewhere between spreadsheets and the memory of sunlight. The fluorescent lights buzzed above, trying to mimic daylight but failing. She reached for her mug. The coffee had gone cold. She smiled faintly, thinking of the lake breeze and her sister's laughter, the way the world had looked wide and possible for a few hours. Somewhere above, in an office she'd never entered, a man stared at that same picture and felt the first crack in the armor of his routine. Neither of them knew yet, but that photo, warm and ordinary, had already begun to tilt their worlds ever so slightly off balance. And sometimes, that's how change starts. Not with thunder, but with a single image of someone finally standing in the sun. Grant Mercer had built his entire life on disciplined daily routines, timed to the minute. Coffee measured in exact ounces, decisions reduced to data points. Control was his religion, and he was its most devout believer. Yet the morning he saw her photo, something shifted, almost imperceptibly, like a single note out of tune in a song he thought he knew by heart. He stared at the image longer than he meant to. Claire Whitman, finance, cost analysis, 6 years. The name surfaced from some old quarterly slide deck, the kind of detail his mind usually filed and forgot. He had probably nodded once at her reports, maybe said good work to her department head. But those eyes, he recognized them now, calm, observant, steady, like she saw more than she ever said. He should have closed the screen and moved on to the day's agenda calls with investors. An acquisition pitch at 11, the usual precision. Instead, he zoomed in again. His thumb hesitated over the glass as though the image might feel warm. She stood in water up to her ankles, light curling through her hair. The faint tan lines across her shoulders, he noticed them and immediately hated himself for noticing. They weren't provocative, just real, imperfect in a world where everything he touched had to be polished and perfect. He leaned back, exhaling through his nose, trying to summon logic. This is nothing, he told himself. An algorithm, a coincidence. The company's internal social network had likely suggested it because they shared contacts. But the word coincidence refused to settle. It felt more like a pull, something inconvenient, unexplainable. He clicked on her profile again, telling himself it was due diligence. If an employee's photo was circulating publicly, it could raise questions about privacy. He could mention it to HR. Yes, that sounded professional enough. Her profile opened minimal information, barely updated. A handful of posts about local art fairs, a charity run from last fall, a quote about integrity pinned at the top, no self-promotion, no drama, just clean, quiet order. Grant scrolled once, then closed the tab. His phone buzzed with a text from his executive assistant. "Car is ready when you are, sir." He didn't move. Outside the glass wall, the city stretched beneath a pale September sky. The Mississippi shimmered faintly between buildings. He used to love that view, used to find clarity in it, Lately, it felt like a painting hung slightly crooked. He rubbed a hand over his jaw. His reflection stared back from the window. Sharp suit, colder eyes. Somewhere along the climb, he'd traded curiosity for control, and yet, here he was, curious. He opened the photo again. The light on her skin reminded him of a day 15 years ago, August in Phoenix. Sunlight so harsh it seemed alive. He'd been 29 then, just starting to build his fortune, when a dermatologist told him he had a malignant mole on his shoulder. Stage 0, caught early, easily removed. Still, the word melanoma had sliced through him. The doctor had said, avoid the sun for a while. For years afterward, he did more than that. He avoided everything warm, vacations, weekends, even his wife's insistence that they go sailing or take drives with the top down. He'd laughed it off, saying he was safer in shade. She'd rolled her eyes and called him Mr. Eclipse. 6 years later, when cancer came for her, not skin, but something deeper, crueler. He remembered how she used to stand in sunlight just to spite his fear. When she was gone, he stayed in the shadows for both of them. Now, this picture, this woman smiling against a horizon of gold, felt like some cosmic rebuke, a quiet reminder that sunlight still existed. He swore under his breath and minimized the screen. His hand trembled slightly, enough to annoy him. He didn't tremble, not ever. He reached for his planner, flipped to the week's schedule, and forced his mind back to work. But the numbers blurred. The outlines of her shoulders lingered behind his eyes like after images. The intercom clicked. Mr. Mercer, the board meeting is in 10 minutes. Understood, he said. His voice was steady. He stood, buttoned his jacket, and crossed the office. The mirror beside the elevator caught him mid-stride, impeccable posture, tie centered, expression unreadable. The man who always had answers. Still. As the elevator descended, he caught his reflection again in the brushed steel doors. He didn't look quite as composed as usual. In the meeting, he was efficient, decisive, his usual self. The others noticed nothing, but when one of the vice presidents presented a new marketing campaign, a glossy montage of perfect buildings and perfect people, something in him recoiled. It all looked so sterile, so lifeless. He found himself thinking about the lake photo instead, about light and texture and imperfection. When the meeting ended, he dismissed his team and returned to his office. The city had brightened. Sunlight slanted through the high windows. He hesitated, then dragged his chair closer to the window pane, letting the warmth hit the back of his hand. The sensation startled him. How long had it been since he'd simply let light touch him? He glanced at his monitor again. The photo tab glowed faintly among the open documents. He could close it now, permanently, and this odd intrusion would fade. He knew how to compartmentalize feelings. He'd made an empire out of it. He clicked the tab closed, then opened it again. His pulse thudded once, hard, as if his body refused obedience. He scrolled down to her employee record in the internal directory. Name, Whitman, Claire, Department Financial Analysis. Tenure, 6 years, 4 months. Supervisor Matthews, Colin. He skimmed, stopped, then exhaled slowly and closed the file. That should have been the end of it. But before he could stop himself, he reopened it again and stared at the simple line, performance consistently exceeds expectations. He hated himself for the curiosity that burned beneath his ribs. This was unprofessional, absurd. She was a name on a ledger, a signature on quarterly reviews. Nothing more. Still, for the first time in years, the thought of numbers and schedules felt hollow. He leaned back, fingers steepled, eyes half closed. Maybe it was just the algorithm, some random crossing of data. Or maybe, in the quiet arithmetic of the universe, coincidence was another word for providence. Either way, something in him had cracked, and once it cracked, control would never feel the same again. Monday unfolded with the quiet rhythm of calculation, the kind of day Claire Whitman had lived 100 times before. The numbers never lied, but they often tried to hide. She found them this time, tucked neatly into an inflated executive amenities line item on the Riverstone project. $480,000 labeled vaguely as aesthetic enhancements. Her eyes narrowed. The proposal had been for community housing, not a luxury hotel. That figure could fund an entire floor of accessible units. She highlighted the entry, fingers flying across the keyboard, drafting a correction with calm precision. She'd done this sort of thing before, quietly, efficiently, never expecting recognition. But something about this one felt different. Maybe it was because she'd been to Riverstone herself, seen the narrow hallways where single mothers and veterans waited for their turn at affordable rent. Or maybe because she was simply tired of people assuming no one noticed. By noon, she'd sent the report to the auditing inbox. With a concise note, adjusted projected cost from $480K to $140K per verified materials list. Surplus reallocated to low-income unit expansion. She read it twice before hitting send, then sat back. A flicker of satisfaction warmed her. Brief, but real. Outside her cubicle, the office buzzed in its usual subdued way. Emails, meetings, muted laughter near the elevators. The world spun exactly as expected, until, around 2 o'clock, the printer ran out of paper and the break room called her name. She gathered the fresh stack, crossed the hallway, and pushed open the door. The scent of burnt coffee drifted in lazy spirals. The place was small, just 2 counters, a fridge, and a line of mismatched mugs above the sink. Only one mug remained clean, perched upside down on the drying rack. Claire reached for it at the same moment as someone else. Their fingers brushed cool skin against warm. A pause. She looked up, startled, straight into gray-blue eyes she recognized from company town halls and glossy investor reports. Grant Mercer. For a heartbeat. Neither spoke. "Sorry," she murmured, withdrawing her hand. "I didn't mean to." "It's fine," he said quickly. His voice was lower than she expected, measured but human. He hesitated, then gestured toward the mug. "Please, go ahead." She shook her head. "You probably need it more than I do." Something like surprise flickered across his face. People didn't usually talk to him like that, not with a dry, easy humor. He picked up the mug but didn't pour the coffee. His gaze lingered a fraction longer than polite. "You're Claire." "Right." The way he said her name soft, certain, made her blink. Yes. He'd never spoken to her before. Not once in 6 years. Hearing her name in his voice was like hearing a familiar word in a foreign accent, recognizable, yet new. He nodded slowly, as if confirming something. "I wanted to say your report this morning on Riverstone was solid. We'll adjust projections accordingly." She stared, momentarily at a loss. "You read my report." "I read everything," he said, but then a faint smile tugged at his mouth. "Well, almost everything." The air between them shifted, charged but quiet. He looked different from the pictures in company magazines, less perfect, somehow. The faint shadows under his eyes softened the sharpness of his features. Claire reached for the coffee pot to fill his cup, but he stopped her with a small motion. "I've got it." "Sure," she said, stepping aside. He poured slowly, careful not to spill. Though the tremor in his hand suggested this wasn't about coordination, the silence wasn't uncomfortable, just aware. She leaned against the counter, pretending to study the notice board charity drives, gym memberships, a faded flyer for the Halloween party no one attended. Anything to avoid staring at him. "Do you ever take a break from numbers?" he asked suddenly. Claire turned to him, caught off guard. "Not really. They're easier than people." He let out a quiet sound that might have been a laugh. "I understand that." For a moment, the conversation felt weightless, balanced on an invisible line between familiarity and formality. Then someone entered, a project manager with a phone pressed to his ear. The spell broke. Grant straightened, returned the coffee pot to its cradle. "Good work, Claire. Thank you, Mr. Mercer." He nodded, then added, almost as an afterthought, It's Grant. Her lips parted, but before she could reply, he was gone, swift, efficient, like a gust of air through an open door. The room seemed smaller without him, the hum of the refrigerator suddenly loud. She stood there for a moment, the warmth of his voice still echoing faintly in her chest. When she finally returned to her desk, her co-workers were oblivious to anything unusual. The world carried on, but her pulse hadn't quite settled. She opened her email to find a new message internal memo, marked from G. Mercer. Her stomach fluttered as she clicked. Effective immediately. Reallocation approved. Good eye. Just that. No greeting, no signature. Yet it felt oddly personal, like a hand laid gently on her shoulder. She reread it, then minimized the screen, unsure what to do with the sudden brightness spreading inside her. Across the building, in his corner office, Grant stood by the window. He had meant the note to be simple, professional. Instead, it had felt dangerously like permission to see her again. Outside, the afternoon light had softened into gold. His coffee sat untouched, cooling beside the untouched mug. He didn't notice. He was thinking of a woman in a sundress by the lake, and how her name had tasted when he spoke it aloud for the first time. Sometimes, he realized, change begins not with grand gestures, but with the quiet sound of two people reaching for the same cup. And for the first time in a decade, Grant Mercer didn't know what tomorrow would bring. The alarm sounded mid-afternoon, a sharp, mechanical tone slicing through the steady hum of office life. People startled, glanced up from monitors, then began filing toward the exits. Drill, someone muttered. Monthly safety check. Claire saved her spreadsheet, grabbed her phone, and followed the slow-moving crowd toward the emergency stairwell. The air in the corridor was warm, smelling faintly of metal and copy toner. By the time she reached the open-air balcony on the 18th floor, the late summer breeze had already started to cool her flushed cheeks. She exhaled, letting the wind wash over her. Below, the Mississippi shimmered in wide, silver ribbons, sunlight bouncing off its surface. 78 degrees perfect, not the oppressive heat of July, but the kind that wrapped around you like a soft hand. Around her, co-workers chatted idly, joking about getting a free break. Claire leaned against the railing, enjoying the rare moment of unstructured air. She hadn't realized how loud the office had been until it wasn't. A voice beside her broke through the quiet. Not the worst way to pause a workday. She turned and froze. Grant Mercer stood a few feet away, jacket off, sleeves rolled neatly to his forearms. The sight of him out here, away from the sterile brightness of his office, felt strangely out of place, like seeing a sculpture step off its pedestal. "Mr. Mercer," she said, surprised. "I didn't expect you to join the drill." He gave a small, wry smile. "Even CEOs have to follow evacuation rules. Imagine the headline otherwise." Claire laughed softly, shaking her head. "I can already see it. Millionaire CEO refuses to exit building, claims productivity is fireproof." His chuckle was low, genuine. For a moment, he looked younger, the lines at his temples less defined. They stood side by side, separated by a polite gap, watching the river below. The wind tugged at her hair, lifting it across her cheek. Without thinking, she tucked a loose strand behind her ear and caught him watching her. He looked away quickly, pretending to study the skyline. "So," he said after a beat, "how was the lake?" Her fingers stilled. The question hung between them, light but heavy with implication. She turned slowly. The lake. He met her eyes. Two harbors, Lake Superior, looked peaceful. And there it was, the quiet confirmation. He had seen the photo. Claire's pulse quickened. "Ah," she said lightly, "so the algorithm got you too." He hesitated, lips curving faintly. "Seems it did." Dangerous thing. "Algorithms," she went on, masking her nerves with humor. "They know too much. Next thing you know, they'll be recommending vacation spots and soulmates." "Maybe that wouldn't be such a bad thing," he said, voice softer now, almost thoughtful. She smiled, trying to deflect the heat rising in her chest. Depends on the soulmate. He studied her face, the sunlight caught in her eyes. The city noise below faded, leaving only the rush of wind and the faint sound of someone laughing far down the balcony. You looked, he began, then paused, as if reconsidering. She tilted her head. Looked what? He exhaled slowly. Free. The words settled like warm light between them. It wasn't flirtation. It wasn't small talk. It was something deeper in observation that saw through layers she hadn't realized she wore. Claire looked back toward the river, letting the breeze cool her face. That's a nice word, she said finally. Haven't heard it used about me in a while. You should, he replied quietly. You wear it well. Her breath caught, but before she could respond, a voice from the stairwell called out that the all clear was given. People began filtering back inside, laughing, talking about dinner plans, the illusion of normalcy returning. Grant didn't move, neither did she. The elevator doors at the far end of the balcony slid open with a polite chime. A few employees stepped in, leaving space for two more. The guard holding the door gestured to them, waiting. Grant's eyes flicked toward the open elevator, then back to Claire. We should probably, she echoed, but neither of them moved. The wind pressed gently against their shoulders, carrying the faint smell of the river steel and water and sunlight. 3 seconds passed, 4. The elevator doors began to close, sealing off the easy exit. Finally, Grant let out a quiet breath, a sound that might have been a laugh if it weren't so weighted. Guess we missed it. Claire smiled, her pulse still a little unsteady. Guess we did. They lingered another moment in the quiet, the city humming faintly below them. She glanced at him, wondering what line they had just crossed and if it was possible to step back from it. When they finally turned toward the stairs, the air between them felt charged, not with words, but with everything left unsaid. Grant fell into step beside her, neither leading nor following. When the stairwell door swung open, he paused, letting her go first. See you tomorrow, Claire, he said. It was an ordinary sentence, but his voice carried something else, recognition, maybe even gratitude. She nodded once, trying to hide her smile as she descended the steps. The hum of fluorescent light would greet her again soon, numbers waiting, life returning to its precise order. Yet part of her knew that something in that order had already shifted, like the faint tremor of a bridge before it settles into a new shape. And though neither of them could name it, both felt the same truth rising in their chests. Some changes don't begin with grand decisions, but with 3 stolen seconds of wind between strangers who suddenly aren't. By Thursday morning, the hum of the office felt heavier, like static before a storm. Claire sat at her desk, the cursor blinking in time with her heartbeat. She had spent the last 4 hours combing through the budget files for the South Side redevelopment project, one of North Rock's biggest and most publicized deals. At first, everything appeared standard, clear categories, consistent margins, line items balanced to the cent. But then she noticed a duplicate sheet buried inside a shared drive labeled Revised Projection SHOF V3. It wasn't flagged, wasn't even properly filed. She clicked it open. The numbers looked familiar, but something was off. Her brow furrowed. The total unit count was 120 on the published report, but here, in this revision, it listed 100, 20 affordable units gone, no notation, no explanation. Her fingers hovered over the mouse. This wasn't a rounding error. It was a deliberate change. Someone had quietly altered the baseline plan and disguised the loss behind inflated costs and overlapping categories. She scrolled further. The new expenses were tucked under vague terms like security adjustments and design variances. Textbook misdirection. Her stomach tightened. She'd seen this pattern before in smaller projects that had slipped past scrutiny. But this was the South Side build. Public funds, community promises, a press release already printed. Numbers don't lie, she thought, but people do. She sat back in her chair, staring at the columns that blinked at her like unspoken accusations. She could ignore it, close the file, pretend she hadn't seen. It wasn't her signature on the documents. No one would blame her for letting it pass. But she couldn't. By lunch, she'd drafted a memo. Every sentence weighed like a confession. To North Rock Legal and Compliance from C. Whitman's subject. Southside revision. Unit discrepancy. A discrepancy has been identified between public proposal data, 120 units, and current revision, V3, 100 units. Suggest internal review before submission of updated projections. Attach documentation, cross-referenced by cost index and timestamp. She read it twice, adjusted nothing, and pressed send. A small act. A dangerous one. She pushed back from her desk, heart still uneven, and went to refill her water. Around her, the office looked normal, keyboards tapping, muted conversations about deadlines and weekend plans. Yet something in the air felt different, as though she'd just dropped a stone into a still pond and was waiting for the ripples to reach the edges. An hour later, she was summoned to legal. The conference room was cool and impersonal, all glass walls and long shadows. The junior counsel, a man in his 30s with perfect posture and polite eyes, gestured toward a chair. "Claire, thanks for bringing this to our attention." He skimmed her memo while she sat opposite, hands folded neatly on her lap. His face didn't change, but the silence stretched long enough to make her uneasy. "Who else knows about this?" he asked finally. "No one," she said. "I came straight here." He nodded. "You did the right thing." But something in his tone felt practiced, a script. She left the room unsure whether she'd done something brave or foolish. That uncertainty lasted until the next morning. It started small, a shift in how people greeted her. Colleagues who used to wave at her now offered tight smiles. A conversation hushed when she entered the break room. One coworker, who usually shared spreadsheets over lunch, suddenly said she was too busy by Friday. The whispers reached her through Sophie from accounting. "Hey," Sophie said quietly, sliding into Claire's cubicle. "You didn't hear this from me, but people are saying you flagged the Southside numbers." Claire looked up, startled. How would they know that it was a confidential memo? Sophie's eyes darted toward the hallway. "Well, someone said legal's been sitting on it. Word got around that you're holding up approvals. Some think you're trying to block the project." "Block it," Claire repeated. "I was trying to protect it." "I know," Sophie said quickly. "But you know how it goes." Once something like that spreads, she trailed off, sympathy clouding her face. Claire leaned back, the weight of it settling over her. Blocking growth, that was the phrase. A corporate sin worse than incompetence. In a company built on expansion, to question momentum was to invite suspicion. That afternoon, during a project alignment meeting, she felt the chill more clearly. Her department head avoided eye contact. When she spoke, a few glances exchanged quietly across the table, nothing overt, just subtle shifts of posture, a collective distance forming. Grant wasn't there. He rarely attended mid-level briefings, but somehow, she felt his absence more keenly now. A strange thought crossed her mind if he knew what was happening. Would he protect her, or would he, too, choose silence? The meeting ended without incident, but as she packed her notes, one of the senior analysts murmured under his breath, "Next time, maybe keep your head down." "Whitman." She froze, looked up. He didn't meet her eyes. In the elevator ride down, the city glimmered in the mirrored doors. Her reflection looked composed, but her pulse betrayed her calm. She'd done the right thing she knew she had. But in the quiet politics of corporations, right didn't always mean safe. That evening, when most lights had dimmed, she sat alone in her cubicle. Her inbox was still. The hum of the fluorescent light above her seemed louder than usual. She opened her email draft folder and stared at a message she'd started but never finished to Grant. She didn't know what she meant to say. Something between explanation and warning. Maybe just a sentence I didn't mean to cause trouble. Her finger hovered over the delete key. Then she sighed and closed the laptop instead. Outside, the night pressed against the windows. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled across the Mississippi, low and uncertain, like a warning she couldn't yet name. And in that moment, Claire realized that the hardest part of truth wasn't speaking it. It was staying upright when the silence that followed began to turn against you. The hotel ballroom glittered like a jewelry box turned inside-out crystal chandeliers, champagne flutes, and a string quartet playing something elegant enough to drown uncertainty. Claire smoothed the skirt of her slate-gray dress, the fabric soft but unfamiliar under her fingers. She wasn't used to evenings like this, to rooms that smelled of money and confidence. Around her, donors and executives mingled, laughing too loudly at polite jokes, their laughter bouncing off the marble like brittle glass. Her department had been invited as a token gesture, representing the hard-working analysts behind North Rock's success. Someone had said she'd wanted to skip it, but Sophie insisted, "You deserve to be seen for once," she'd said, pressing a pair of silver earrings into Claire's hand. So here she was, clutching a glass of wine she hadn't touched, watching a world that didn't quite feel like hers. Across the room, near the stage, Grant Mercer stood in a midnight blue tuxedo, his posture as composed as ever. Yet, his eyes, when they found her through the crowd, were anything but. For a moment, the noise dimmed. The clinking glasses, the laughter, even the music, all of it faded to a hum. The distance between them felt both vast and fragile. He excused himself from a conversation with a senator, his polite smile barely disguising distraction. Claire looked away, heart thudding, pretending to study the art installation near the bar. Minutes later, she felt rather than saw him approach. "Claire," he said quietly. She turned, careful not to let surprise show. "Mr. Mercer." He hesitated, then nodded toward the terrace doors. "It's loud in here. Walk with me." It wasn't quite a request, nor an order, just an offering. She followed him through the crowd, the scent of cologne and champagne trailing after them. Outside, the night air wrapped around them like a secret. The terrace overlooked the river, lights reflecting off the slow-moving water. For a long moment, neither spoke. Grant leaned against the railing, undoing the top button of his collar. The gesture, so small, felt like a quiet surrender. "I'm supposed to enjoy these things," he said finally. "Donors, speeches, the performance of success. You don't?" He looked at her. The city's glow caught in his eyes. "Let's just say I'm better at numbers than people." Claire smiled faintly. "That makes two of us." He studied her, then said softly, "You look different tonight." Different how he seemed to search for the right word, settling on one that wasn't safe. Present. Like you stopped hiding. Her laugh came out too quickly. "Maybe I just wore better lighting." But he didn't laugh. "It's not the lighting." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was delicate, alive. Claire looked away toward the river. "I didn't think you noticed people like me." He frowned. "People like you?" "The quiet ones," she said, her voice steady but edged with something real. "The ones who make things work but never get introduced at events like this. We're useful, not visible." He took a step closer, not enough to break propriety, but enough that she could feel his presence shift the air. "That's not how I see you." She turned to face him. "Isn't it?" His gaze didn't waver. "No. I noticed you long before I understood why." The admission hung between them like static before lightning. She tried to speak, but the words tangled. "Then why does it feel like the only time people notice me is when I break something? When I ask questions that make them uncomfortable?" Grant's expression softened. "Because most people don't like mirrors. You make them look closer than they want to." The wind stirred her hair, carrying the scent of her perfume, something light, almost floral. He closed his eyes briefly, steadying himself against the pull. She tilted her head, studying him. "What about you? Do you like mirrors?" He laughed once, quietly. "No, but one found me anyway." Her lips parted, uncertain if he meant her. She didn't dare ask. He looked out at the water again, his voice quieter now. "That photo, the one your sister posted." She tensed, waiting. "It unsettled me," he said. Not because of what it showed, but because of what it reminded me of. Joy. It's a dangerous thing when you've built your life around control. She watched him carefully. Why dangerous? Because once you feel it, he said, you can't unfeel it. And you start to wonder what else you've been missing. Her heart tightened. Maybe missing something isn't the same as losing it. He smiled faintly, a sad kind of warmth. You sound like someone who still believes there's a way back. I don't know if I do, she admitted, but I'm tired of pretending that being invisible is the same as being safe. He turned toward her fully then, and for a heartbeat. The distance between them vanished. The city lights painted gold along her jawline, and he thought, absurdly, that she was the first real thing he'd seen in years. His hand moved before reason caught it, hovering just shy of touching her arm. She didn't step back. The air pulsed between them, thin as glass. Then, as if sensing the edge they stood on, she drew in a small breath and took a single step backward. He let his hand fall. The restraint cost him. Respect held where desire pressed. For a long moment, they stood there in the hush, two people caught between what was right and what was already true. Inside, applause erupted, the sound of a speech ending, the evening resuming its rhythm. The noise reached them like an echo from another life. Claire turned toward the door. We should go back in. He nodded, though neither of them moved. Grant, she said softly, testing the sound of his name. You don't have to explain the photo. I wasn't trying to, he replied. I think I was trying to thank you for it. Her throat tightened, but she managed a small smile. You're welcome. Then, they re-entered the ballroom together, side by side, but not touching. The air inside felt warmer, denser, filled with unspoken things. Somewhere behind them, on the terrace, the night breeze carried the last of their words away. Two people who had finally seen each other, and yet still chose not to cross the line. Not yet. The following Monday began without fanfare, rain tapping against the tall glass windows of North Rock's upper floors, traffic lights blinking red across wet pavement. Grant Mercer arrived earlier than usual. His reflection followed him through the elevator doors, pressed suit, steady jawline, but eyes that hadn't rested well in days. He'd spent the weekend replaying the gala terrace in his mind, the scent of rain on her skin, the word free hanging between them like a line he hadn't dared cross. It wasn't guilt he felt, exactly. It was the awareness of how thin the ice had become beneath his carefully ordered world. By 8:05, he was standing outside the chief people officer's office. Grant, said Evelyn Cho, looking up from a stack of onboarding reports. You're early. That's never a good sign. He managed a small smile. It's not a crisis, but it's personal, and it intersects company ethics. So it's delicate. Evelyn leaned back in her chair, folding her arms. All right, tell me. He closed the door behind him, the soft click of finality echoing louder than expected. There's an employee in finance, Claire Whitman. I believe you know the name. Evelyn nodded. Yes, she's solid, accurate, no drama. What about her? Grant took a breath, then said the sentence that cost him more than he liked to admit. I have feelings for her. Evelyn blinked once, twice, then set her pen down. You realize the implications of saying that to me, I do, he said quietly. Which is why I'm here. Before anything happens or doesn't, I'm recusing myself from all decisions that touch her work or advancement. Effective immediately. She studied him, searching for the subtext. Grant, this is unusually transparent of you. I don't want transparency to come after someone gets hurt, he replied. I'd rather it start now. Evelyn tapped a finger against her mug. You're aware rumors have been swirling about her South Side audit. Some think she's standing in the way of growth. Yes, he said, jaw tightening. She was right to question it. I've reviewed the numbers myself. The discrepancy shouldn't have been buried. Her brows lifted. So, you're defending her. I'm defending integrity, he said. And I need to make sure no one assumes my defense is personal. Evelyn leaned forward, her voice softening. You know, Grant, most executives in your position would do the opposite, bury the conflict. Hope no one notices. He looked at the rain streaking the window. I've built a life on hiding things that mattered. I won't add her to that list. She regarded him for a long moment, then nodded. All right, here's what we'll do. We'll assign her a lateral supervisor outside your reporting chain. No demotion, no change in pay. She can accept or decline. You stay out of all finance approvals until further notice. Thank you, he said. Evelyn smiled faintly. Don't thank me yet. HR paper trails have sharp edges. He allowed himself a brief exhale. Better sharp than hidden. By noon, the forms were drafted, reviewed, and filed. The process was clinical, professional, everything it should be. Yet the entire time, Grant's pulse beat faster than it had in any board meeting. He signed his name at the bottom, his clean, slanted signature anchoring the decision, no undoing it now. Claire received the email that afternoon. Subject line: updated supervisory assignment. Compliance transition. She reread it 3 times, trying to decipher its tone. The message was polite, factual. Her role would remain the same, but oversight of her department would transfer to an external manager in operations. Pending her consent. At the bottom, a single line. Decision initiated by executive recusal for transparency purposes. Her pulse caught. She didn't need to guess who the executive was. When she entered the HR office later that day, Evelyn Cho greeted her warmly. Claire, thanks for coming. This isn't disciplinary, quite the opposite. Claire nodded, wary. Then what is it? Evelyn slid the form across the desk. Mr. Mercer voluntarily recused himself from any authority that could affect your role. This keeps both of you above reproach. You can choose to keep your current reporting line through your department head, or accept a lateral supervisor. No pay change, no demotion. It's entirely up to you. Claire blinked, absorbing the words. He did this? Yes. Evelyn's expression softened. He didn't have to. That says something. For a long moment, Claire said nothing. She thought about the balcony, the honesty in his eyes when he'd said free, about how easy it would have been for him to ignore her completely, to let whispers do their quiet damage. May I ask something off the record? She said finally. Evelyn nodded. Is it bad that I respect him more now than I did yesterday? Evelyn smiled gently. No, it's human. Claire took the pen. Then I'll accept the lateral supervisor. It'll keep things clean. But I'm not stepping off the Southside audit. Are you sure completely? Her voice was calm, steady. If the work is honest, it should stand. Evelyn studied her for a moment, then signed her portion of the form. You know, she said, for someone people call quiet, you have quite a spine. Claire's lips curved slightly. Maybe people just weren't looking in the right place. That evening, the office thinned out early, rain still misting the streets below. Claire lingered to finish her report, the low hum of computers filling the silence. At 6:42, her inbox pinged from G. Mercer North Rock. Com. Subject Southside. Update. For what it's worth, you did the right thing. The review is moving forward. Stay steady. No greeting, no signature, but the care in those 6 words was unmistakable. She hovered her cursor over reply, then didn't. Some messages didn't need answers. Instead, she closed the laptop and walked to the window. The city lights blurred in the rain, reflections merging into soft gold streaks. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel invisible. Not because someone powerful had noticed her, but because she had refused to disappear when it mattered. Downstairs, Grant waited in the lobby, watching the same rain fall through the glass. He didn't text, didn't call, just stood there, letting the silence stretch proof that sometimes doing the right thing meant stepping back, not closer. And yet, as the storm eased and the city lights steadied, both of them felt the same quiet certainty rising beneath the noise. This was only the beginning. The first snow came early that year, October, before the city had even turned its clocks back. The flurries arrived quietly, almost shy, like someone knocking on a door they weren't sure they should open. From her window on the 15th floor, Claire watched them fall over the river, each flake dissolving before it reached the water. The world outside looked gentler for a moment, edges softened, noise subdued, but inside her chest, something ached. By noon, she'd finished her reports early. Her co-workers were buzzing about the sudden weather, making plans for soup lunches and early commutes. Claire simply shut down her computer and slipped her coat on. She didn't tell anyone where she was going. She never did. The Memorial Garden sat 4 blocks from the office, a narrow stretch of green tucked behind the old courthouse. Quiet, even at midday. A small plaque at the entrance read, "In memory of those who loved and were loved here." Snowflakes drifted across the stone path as she walked, landing on her gloves like tiny, fleeting truths. She stopped at the 3rd row of plaques, second from the left. The engraving was simple, David Whitman, 1979 to 2019. Still our compass, still our calm. Claire knelt, brushing away the thin dusting of snow. The metal was cold beneath her fingertips. "Hi," she whispered. The word caught somewhere between breath and prayer. "It's early this year. You'd like that." For a while, she just sat there, knees damp against the frozen ground. The sounds of the city felt distant car horns softened by snow. Footsteps muted. David had loved winter. He used to stand by the window of their first apartment, coffee in hand, watching flakes swirl like he was seeing magic for the first time every time. He'd once told her that snow made the world briefly honest. She never understood what he meant until after he was gone. Honesty. She'd learned, often arrived with silence. She didn't cry at first. She rarely did anymore. But when she closed her eyes, the ache pressed harder, the familiar mix of gratitude and longing that time never seemed to dilute. After a while, she whispered, "I'm okay." Then, quieter. Mostly. By the time she left, the snow had begun to stick. Her boots left small, solitary prints leading back toward the street. Across the square, Grant Mercer watched from a respectful distance. He hadn't followed her on purpose. He'd been on his way to a lunch meeting at the courthouse when he noticed her walking down the path, head bowed slightly against the wind. It wasn't until she stopped at the Memorial Garden that he understood. He recognized that stillness, the kind that doesn't ask for comfort, only space. So he stayed where he was, hands in his pockets, watching the faint snow gather on her shoulders. Something in the sight tightened his throat. He didn't know her story. Not really. He only knew that the quiet strength she carried wasn't born of convenience. People didn't move through life that gently unless they'd learned how easily things could break. When she finally rose and walked back toward the main street, he turned away first, pretending to study his phone until she passed out of view. That evening, as the office emptied, the memory still followed him, the image of her kneeling by the plaque, the snow, her unguarded expression. It wasn't pity he felt, it was understanding, the kind that came from his own ghosts. He remembered a hospital room years ago, the sound of a monitor slowing, the weight of a hand going still in his wife's hand, the woman he'd once thought time couldn't touch. He'd built a fortress around that grief, brick by brick, in deals and deadlines. But somehow, seeing Claire in that quiet garden cracked a small piece of it loose. By the time the janitor made his last rounds, Grant was still in his office, lights dimmed, city glowing cold outside. He opened the break room cabinet, found the tin of cocoa mix the interns used, and poured 2 scoops into a steel thermos. He didn't add a note. Words felt unnecessary, intrusive. Even, he left it on her desk, right beside her monitor, where she would see it first thing, the next morning. Claire arrived early, the snow outside now a light crust of white on rooftops. The office felt half asleep, computers humming softly in the dim light. When she reached her cubicle, she stopped. The thermos sat there, silver, faintly warm to the touch. No note, no hint of who had left it. She unscrewed the lid. The faint scent of cocoa rose up, rich and sweet. For a long moment, she simply held it, the heat seeping into her palms. Then she took a sip. The taste was exactly what she hadn't realized she needed: simple, comforting, human. Her eyes stung unexpectedly, not from sadness this time, but from something softer. Gratitude, maybe, connection. She looked around the quiet office. No one was there yet. The city beyond the window blurred beneath the falling snow, a watercolor of gray and gold. Claire exhaled, the steam curling from the thermos like a secret. She didn't know who had left it, but somehow, she didn't need to, because in that small act, no words, no credit. She felt seen, not as an employee, not as the woman who filed memos that made trouble, not even as the widow who kept her grief tucked away between deadlines. Just seen. She wiped a tear quickly before it could fall, set the thermos down, and smiled to herself. The day outside was still cold, the work still waiting, but the air inside felt just a little warmer. And in an office where people rarely noticed kindness unless it came with a memo. Warmth itself was the most radical act of all. The message landed in inboxes just after 9:00. An internal email. Subject line, lighthearted, almost playful. Weekend revelations. By 9:07, half the 15th floor had seen it. By 9:12, the whispers started. It wasn't until 9:30 that Claire saw it herself, a forwarded thread. Subject unchanged, the photo unmistakable, her own. The one her sister had taken by the lake last summer. Only this version was cropped, tight, the frame cut above her collarbone, so that the gentle sunlight and faint tan lines now looked suggestive, intentional, even beneath it. A caption someone had typed, "Professional or thirsty hard to tell these days." Claire's breath caught, her screen blurred. For a second she thought she might faint. Then, without thinking, she closed the laptop and stood so fast her chair rolled back against the cubicle wall. People were staring not directly, but in that half-curious, half-pitying way that said, "We saw it too, and we're pretending we didn't." She made it to the restroom before the first tear fell. The mirror above the sink reflected someone she barely recognized. Face pale, lips pressed thin. She ducked into a stall, locked it, and pressed both hands against her chest, trying to steady the small, wild pulse of humiliation beating beneath her ribs. Her mind spun. Who would do this? Why now? She'd kept everything professional. She'd done her job, told the truth, followed the rules, and yet here she was, turned into gossip because she'd once stood in sunlight and smiled. From the hallway, muffled laughter floated in, two voices trading quick comments before fading away. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the tile, to take back every second of that weekend, that photo, that fleeting moment when she'd felt alive. But she couldn't. By 10 scuolas, the image had reached the 25th floor. Grant Mercer was in a meeting with investors when Evelyn Cho entered, her face tight, holding a printed page. She slid it across the table. "We have a problem?" He looked down, saw the photo, read the caption. Something in his jaw locked. He pushed back his chair without a word, ignoring the startled looks from around the table. "Reschedule this call," he said. Then to Evelyn, now, within minutes. The building's internal investigation system was engaged. Server logs traced the origin of the email, following its path backward like a string of breadcrumbs. By 10:43, the source was confirmed. Mark Denshaw, Senior VP of Development. Grant's stomach turned. Denshaw, the same man whose division had padded the Southside project. The same man whose bonus was tied to keeping those inflated numbers buried. The dots connected instantly too perfectly. The memo, the rumors, now this. It wasn't random cruelty. It was retaliation. He stood by the glass wall of his office, watching the snow drift across the river, trying to steady the storm inside him. He'd seen pettiness before boardroom backstabbing, power games, but this was different. This was personal. This was violence dressed as a joke. "Evelyn," he said, turning back. "Suspend him, effective immediately." She nodded. "You want HR protocol first?" "No," he said, voice low, "I want it public, by noon." An all-company email hit every inbox in North Rock subject workplace, conduct, and integrity. Effective immediately. Mark Denshaw has been suspended pending investigation into misuse of company communication channels and violation of the North Rock Code of Ethics. Our values are not words on a wall. They are actions. No one at this company will be humiliated, diminished, or disrespected for being human. Mercer people froze when they read it. No euphemisms, no corporate spin, just consequences. Within the hour, the whispering stopped. The laughter turned into silence. Claire saw the email on her screen, her hand trembling slightly as she scrolled. And then beneath the official memo, she saw something else. A second message, just for her. From G. Mercera North Rock. Calm, subject, no apology. Big enough, Claire. I can't undo what happened today, but I can promise you it will never happen again under my watch. You didn't deserve this. You never will. The photo you took wasn't a scandal. It was sunlight. And I'm sorry the world forgot how to see the difference. Grant. She read it twice, tears gathering hot behind her eyes. She didn't reply, couldn't. Words felt small against the size of the relief and anger tangled inside her. Instead, she sat there for a long moment, staring out the window at the soft white blur of snow still falling. When she finally opened her drawer to grab a tissue, her hand brushed against the old thermos still sitting there, the one with traces of cocoa inside. It had gone cold days ago, but she hadn't thrown it away. She lifted it, held it close for a second. Her tears came then. Quick and silent, not the helpless kind from the restroom earlier, but something cleaner, sharper, a release, somewhere deep inside, beneath the ache. She realized something had shifted again. The office, once indifferent, now felt watchful, not in judgment, but in recognition. Outside her cubicle, people spoke in hushed tones, but not about her, about him, about how the CEO had taken sides hers, about how no one had ever seen that kind of apology before. For the first time in her career, the balance of power had tilted toward decency. Claire leaned back in her chair, wiped her cheeks, and looked at the snowfall. Each flake vanished before touching the river, but together they changed the light, the mood, the whole city's reflection. She took a slow breath and whispered to herself, almost smiling, let them talk, because now, when they did, the story wasn't about humiliation. It was about courage and the man who decided that dignity was worth defending, even if it cost him comfort. The sky had cleared by the time Grant sent the message audit review. Off-site, 2 hours max, supervisor attending, Highway 10, Twin Pines Diner, 11:30. It was the most professional email he could compose, factual, traceable, free of subtext. Yet the moment he hit send, his pulse betrayed him. Because this wasn't just about ledgers, it was about breathing outside the glass box for once, in daylight, where things might feel less haunted. Claire received it while reviewing the post-investigation files. The subject line made her stomach tighten, not with dread this time, but with something quieter, like anticipation she didn't want to name. She checked the attached itinerary the neutral supervisor, a quiet analyst named Drew Hollis, was CC'd. Everything clean, transparent, respectful. By 10:45, she'd printed the audit notes and tucked them into a folder. By 11:20, she was standing outside the building, coat buttoned against the wind, watching Grant's dark sedan pull to the curb. He leaned across the passenger seat window. "Ride with me." She hesitated, then nodded. "All right, but I'm picking the radio." He smiled, the kind that didn't reach for charm, just ease, deal. They drove north on Highway 10, where the city thinned into long stretches of pine and low farmland glazed with morning frost. The air carried that unmistakable winter light, pale gold, mercifully honest. For the first 20 minutes, they talked about the audit. Drew sat in the back, tablet open, noting revisions, everything formal, numbers and ethics. The conversation stayed on track, the allocation of funds, oversight on community units, the revised transparency statement. When they finally reached consensus, Drew closed his tablet. "We're good," he said. "Audit approved for reissue. I'll finalize the summary after lunch." Grant nodded. "Appreciate it. Lunch is on me." The diner sat off a small exit, tucked between a gas station and a snow-dusted field. Twin Pines, a chrome and neon relic from another era. Inside, it smelled like coffee, maple syrup, and something fried in butter. They chose a booth near the window. Claire ordered black coffee and a grilled cheese. Drew took a club sandwich. Grant, predictably, didn't eat much, just stirred his cup, eyes occasionally drifting to the falling light beyond the glass. Conversation eased into lighter territory. Claire asked, "Do you ever take real breaks?" He looked at her, surprised. "Define real." She smiled faintly. "Ones that don't involve a spreadsheet." "Then no," he admitted, not since before. He didn't finish the sentence, but she understood the weight in it before loss, before silence. She didn't press. "You should try one sometime. They're underrated." Drew excused himself after they finished, needing to make a call. For a few minutes, it was just the two of them. The silence stretched, but it wasn't awkward. It was full the kind of quiet that holds meaning, like air before a song. Claire traced the rim of her coffee cup. "You know," she said softly, "I used to come to places like this with David. We'd drive until we found a diner that looked like it hadn't changed since 1960. He said it made time feel less slippery." Grant looked at her then, really looked not as her CEO, not as a man trying to be careful, but as someone who recognized grief wearing its Sunday best. "Sounds like he knew how to hold on to the right moments," Grant said. "He did." She smiled, small but true. "I'm still learning." He leaned back, his gaze steady. "For what it's worth, you're doing all right." The words caught her off guard, not because of what he said, but how gently he said it. No pity, no performance, just quiet recognition. Outside, the first traces of afternoon light began to fade. Snow flurries danced across the empty highway, small as ash. Claire exhaled. "This might be the most human lunch meeting I've ever had." "Good," Grant said. "We should probably ruin it with another audit next week." She laughed a sound that startled both of them. For a second, he forgot the careful structure of his sentences, forgot HR protocols, forgot everything except the warmth of that laugh. He reached for his jacket, pulling a few bills from his wallet. As they stood to leave, he said it, the thing that had been pressing at the back of his throat for weeks. "I don't want the photo." She blinked, halfway to the door. What he swallowed? I mean, it's not the picture that stayed with me. It's the person who could smile like that, like the world hadn't already taken something from her. The air shifted between them, not heavier, just more real. Claire's heart stumbled once, then steadied. She didn't answer. Not yet. She just looked at him, her breath visible in the cold as they stepped outside. He held the diner door open for her, eyes lowered, as though afraid he'd said too much. The drive back was quieter. Drew dozed off in the back seat, the hum of the tires steady on the asphalt. Claire rested her forehead lightly against the window, watching snow blur past the trees. She didn't know what she would say, or if she should say anything at all, but she knew this for the first time in years. Silence didn't feel lonely. It felt earned. As the skyline of the city came back into view, she closed her eyes, letting herself hold that small, impossible peace, a feeling like sunlight filtered through frost. The boardroom felt colder that morning, not because of the weather, but because of what hung in the air. Outside, December light bled across the skyline, sharp and colorless. Inside, the long walnut table gleamed like a mirror, reflecting 12 faces that were used to winning, not apologizing. Grant Mercer sat at the head, jacket off, sleeves rolled up, a man who'd stopped hiding behind polish. His eyes flicked from one end of the table to the other, gauging the temperature before the storm. The chair of the finance subcommittee cleared his throat. "We've reviewed the disciplinary action taken against Denshaw," he began, voice smooth as glass. "Some of us feel the response was excessive. The man delivered growth, after all. Grant didn't look up from his notes. He falsified projections and humiliated an employee, an overreaction to an internal joke, another member said quickly, flipping through papers. Morale has taken a hit. Grant, donors are nervous. We're not a church. We're a business. That word business clanged like metal in the room. Grant set his pen down. And what do we build? Exactly. If not homes for people who trust us to mean what we say. The subcommittee chair gave a thin smile. We build stability, revenue, predictability, which we lose when we go to war over semantics. The Southside project's only short 20 units. That's not fraud, that's optimization. A silence followed the kind that feels like a dare. Grant looked up slowly, meeting the man's gaze. We promised 120 families a roof. Do you hear how it sounds when you call that optimization? Someone down the table shifted uncomfortably. The air felt brittle, the way it does just before a window cracks. Evelyn Cho sat 2 seats away, watching him carefully. Her posture was calm, but her fingers were clasped tight in her lap. She knew what it cost him to keep his tone even. The oldest board member, a silver-haired man named Leonard Pike, leaned back with a sigh. Grant, no one's questioning your integrity, but you've made this personal. You're defending a junior analyst who stirred unnecessary trouble. Grant's eyes didn't waver. She stirred accuracy. There's a difference. And what's your plan when donors walk someone else challenged? You'll take responsibility for the lost funding. Yes, he said. The word landed with a quiet authority that stopped the murmuring. He leaned forward, palms on the table. If keeping integrity costs us donations, then those donations were already borrowed against our conscience. The room went still. The hum of the ventilation sounded like distant wind. Gentlemen, Grant said, softer now. If we start measuring worth by how little truth costs us, we've already lost the company. Across the table, a woman cleared her throat. She'd been silent the entire time, an elegant figure in a gray wool coat, her silver hair pulled neatly back. Evelyn glanced at her and felt a shift ripple through the room. Mrs. Eleanor North, the founder's widow. Her husband's name was still etched in the marble wall of the lobby, the same name that had built the company from a construction crew into a civic institution. Eleanor spoke with a calm that cut through the static. I've read the memo. Grant turned toward her. She continued, voice measured. The one your analyst wrote, Ms. Whitman. I stayed up last night going through every line. The others exchanged looks, uneasy. No one interrupted her. I remember when this company built its first 50 units on the South Side. My husband stood in front of the first finished home and told the family, if your children can sleep warm here, we've done our job. That was our mission, not stock prices. Her hand rested lightly on the edge of the table. That memo reminded me of that day. Numbers without conscience build nothing that lasts. The chair of finance started to speak, but she lifted a single hand, graceful, final, enough. I call the motion to deliver the full 120 units as promised. The vote took less than 2 minutes. When the last hand was raised, Grant let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. The motion passed by a single vote, hers. He met Eleanor's eyes across the table. She gave the smallest nod, one that said, don't waste what you've been given. As the board dispersed, conversations low and clipped, Evelyn touched his shoulder lightly. You just took a hammer to a glass ceiling of old money. Grant smiled faintly. Then I hope it shatters clean. That evening, as twilight settled over the city, he stood by his office window, watching the first faint flakes fall, not snow this time, just ash-colored sleet. The skyline shimmered beneath it, stubborn and alive. He thought about Claire, about the quiet precision of her memo, the courage it took to write what others would have buried. He wanted to tell her what had happened, that her work had changed the board's mind, that one woman's clarity had steadied an empire. But he didn't call. Instead, he opened his laptop and typed a single line into an email draft. Unsent, we promised 120 families, and we'll keep that promise because you made us remember who we are. He didn't send it, Some victories didn't need applause. Below, on the 15th floor, Claire worked late without knowing any of it yet. She was double-checking numbers, her face calm under the desk lamp's glow. Through the glass between their floors, through hierarchy, through silence, something invisible connected them still. It wasn't romance, not yet. It was respect, the kind that makes the world, for a flicker, feel like it might just be worth rebuilding. The office was nearly empty when Claire realized how late it had become. The winter sunset had already faded, leaving the windows black and reflective. The hum of the heating vents and the faint clack of one last keyboard somewhere down the hall were the only sounds. She was gathering her files when she saw the lights still on, upstairs the corner office on the 25th floor, glowing like a small ship in fog. Grant's office. She hesitated, fingers resting on the spine of her notebook. Part of her told herself to leave, to let the day end where it was safe. But another part, the braver, quieter part, wanted to see him. She took the elevator up. When the doors opened, the hallway was dark except for the strip of light spilling from his office. She knocked softly against the open frame. He looked up, startled for a second, then smiled faintly. "I didn't think anyone was still here." "I was finishing the final figures," she said. "I saw your light." Grant closed his laptop halfway, leaning back in his chair. "It's a bad habit. I keep thinking if I stare long enough, I'll make sense of everything." Claire stepped inside. "Does it work?" "Sometimes," he said. "Tonight?" "Not so much." She hesitated, then sat across from him, the city lights behind her turning the glass into silver haze. "I wanted to thank you," she said quietly. "For the board meeting, I heard—" He shook his head. "Don't thank me. You wrote the memo. You gave them something worth defending." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was layered, the kind of silence that holds two people who have already said too much without words. After a moment, Grant spoke again, his voice lower. "There's something I should explain about the photo." Claire met his eyes steady, curious, unflinching. He exhaled. "Years ago, I had a melanoma scare. Small spot on my shoulder. Caught early. But for months, before the surgery, I couldn't go in the sun. The doctors made me avoid it entirely. My wife—" He paused, throat tightening. "She used to tease me about it. Said I looked like a man allergic to daylight." He smiled faintly, the kind that carried both affection and ache. "After she died," he continued, "I kept that habit, shades drawn, early mornings, late nights. It was easier to work in artificial light, safe, controlled." He glanced out at the dark window, his reflection faint against the city's glow. "So, when I saw that picture of you, it wasn't what people thought, it wasn't desire, it was recognition." "Recognition?" she asked softly. He nodded. "Of something I'd forgotten. That light doesn't just burn. It also heals. You were standing there, sun on your shoulders, and for the first time in years, I wanted to step into it again." Claire felt her throat tighten. The way he said it without flattery, without agenda, felt like truth, the kind that humbles you. She looked down at her hands. "I should tell you what that picture meant to me, too." He waited. It was the first time I'd worn a sleeveless dress since David died. Her voice trembled, but she didn't look away. Grief has a way of making you cover up not just your skin, but everything that used to feel alive. For a long time, I thought it was respect, mourning, but it was fear. Fear of being seen as whole when I wasn't. Grant's eyes softened. "So, when my sister took that photo," Claire said, "it wasn't about showing off. It was proof that I could stand in the sun and not feel guilty. Those tan lines," she smiled faintly. "They're not what people think. They're just the line where the darkness ended." For a long moment, neither spoke. The fluorescent light above them hummed, soft and steady. Outside, snow had begun to fall again, tracing pale rivers against the glass. Then Grant said quietly, "You know, when people talked about that photo, they said it drove me crazy. And they were right, but not the way they meant." She looked up. "It drove me crazy," he said, "that the world can twist something so pure into something small. that a moment of joy could be turned into shame. Claire felt her eyes sting. He stood slowly, walking to the window. The city spread wide and restless beneath him. "I don't want to make this harder for you," he said. "If anything I've done—" "Stop," she said softly. "You haven't." He turned, surprised by the certainty in her tone. She rose too, standing across from him now, the desk between them. "I think," she said, choosing each word carefully, "we've both been afraid of the same thing. That if we let ourselves want something honest, it'll ruin everything else we've built." He nodded slowly. "Maybe so." Her voice softened, but maybe honesty is what keeps it from being ruined. They stood there, the distance between them charged, but calm, not dangerous this time. Just real. Grant swallowed. "If we try this," he said finally, the words quiet but deliberate, "it has to honor you." Claire held his gaze. "It has to honor the work, too." For a second, the room seemed to breathe with them two lives that had been moving parallel, finally daring to intersect. Then Claire smiled small, fragile, but full of life. "Maybe that's the same thing," she said. He smiled back, and for the first time since either of them could remember, the office didn't feel like a place of walls and windows. It felt like the start of something that didn't need to be hidden. Outside, the snow kept falling quiet, unhurried, covering the city in soft white lines, erasing every sharp edge. The ink on the disclosure form was still drying when Claire exhaled for the first time that morning. The line above her name read "Voluntary Acknowledgement of Relationship Between Employees, with full transparency and safeguards." The language was bureaucratic, but the meaning wasn't. Across from her, Grant signed his portion with his usual careful stroke, then looked up. His expression wasn't triumphant. It was calm, like a man who had been holding his breath for years and was finally allowed to inhale. Evelyn Cho glanced between them, then nodded. "Everything's in order. HR will circulate the formal memo by end of day. You both handled this exactly as it should be handled openly." "Openly," Grant repeated, as if testing the weight of the word. "Feels strange, but good." Evelyn smiled. Strange is often what integrity feels like at first. Claire tucked a stray hair behind her ear, feeling the tension that had lived in her shoulders for weeks begin to loosen. "So that's it," she asked. "No tribunal." "Not unless you two start writing poetry in the company memos," Evelyn said, deadpan, then, softer, "Go build something worth the paperwork." By the end of the week, Claire's name had been transferred to a new department, Community Impact Analytics. It was a division she'd quietly admired for years, the one that measured how North Rock's projects affected real neighborhoods, not just spreadsheets. She'd asked for it herself during the reassignment conversation, surprising even Grant. "You don't have to move," he'd said. "You're not being pushed." "I know," she'd replied, "but I want to. I'd rather build something visible than stay hidden in compliance. Maybe it's time I work where people live, not just where numbers live." He'd nodded, eyes soft. "Then I'll stay out of your way." Proudly. The transition went smoothly. Her new desk overlooked the river, sunlight hitting the glass in long afternoon stripes. There were fewer suits here, more coffee mugs and community photos pinned to corkboards. It felt human and hers. Every boundary they had agreed on was written down. No late-night meetings behind closed doors. No hidden lunches. Any feedback or performance evaluation went through intermediaries. Grant, being Grant, took it even further. He set his office doors to stay open by default during business hours. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. At first, people whispered as people do. But when no scandal followed, no favoritism, no sudden promotions, the whispers lost oxygen. What replaced them wasn't gossip, but something rarer, respect. By January, the city had frozen into its usual quiet. The river moved sluggishly under a thin crust of ice, reflecting pale sunlight like broken glass. Claire stood outside the North Rock building, scarf looped twice around her neck, breath fogging in the cold. She was waiting something she hadn't done for anyone in a long time. Grant appeared a few minutes later, stepping through the revolving door. Coat collar turned up against the wind. 34 degrees, he said, checking his watch. Feels colder. Depends on who you're standing with, she teased, her smile reaching her eyes. He laughed a low, genuine sound she'd learned to love. For a moment, they simply stood there, the city bustling faintly around them. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. It wasn't typed, it was handwritten. "What's this?" she asked. "A second contract," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "You just can't help yourself." He grinned a little. "Humor me." She unfolded the page. It read, "Terms of agreement unofficial. Speak truth, even when it's inconvenient. Never dim each other's light for comfort. Default to daylight in work, in words, in love. No secrets, no apologies for being human." Her throat tightened. "This is actually good." "I had a good co-author," he said quietly, "even if she doesn't know she's been writing it for months." She looked up, snow flurries catching in her hair. "And if I sign this one?" He stepped closer, close enough that their breath mingled, visible in the cold. "Then it's binding." Claire smiled. "On what grounds?" "On the grounds that I mean it." The moment stretched no pretense, no shadows, just winter air and two people who had finally stopped running from themselves. Then she reached out, gloved fingers brushing his cheek. "You know," she said softly, "if we're doing this right, there's one clause missing." "What's that?" She leaned in. "The one that says we get to live." He didn't ask permission. He didn't need to. Their first kiss happened in daylight, under a pale sun and a sky the color of frost. It wasn't secret, and it wasn't rushed. It was steady, the kind of kiss that carries a promise rather than a demand. Around them, the city moved horns, footsteps, the distant hum of traffic, but inside that moment, everything slowed. The cold air burned pleasantly against their skin, their breath visible between them like a shared language. When they finally parted, both were smiling, cheeks flushed from the chill. Grant whispered, "No secrets." Claire nodded, "No apologies." They began to walk, side by side, the river on one side, the city rising on the other, two silhouettes framed by winter light. For the first time, they weren't afraid of being seen. The morning of the opening felt like a promise fulfilled. The air was crisp, the kind of late February chill that still bit the skin but carried a trace of spring somewhere underneath. Balloons in muted blues and golds marked the new entrance of the Southside Renewal Complex, 120 families worth of warmth. Finally built. Finally theirs. Children ran between legs and cardboard boxes, their laughter echoing off the fresh brick walls. Moving trucks idled on the street, engines humming like heartbeats. Volunteers handed out coffee and muffins from folding tables. Claire stood near the lobby doors, clipboard in hand, though the event didn't really need her anymore. The numbers had long since become lives, spreadsheets turned into handshakes, signatures into rooms with sunlight. She wore a long gray coat and a soft scarf the color of cocoa, the same kind she'd worn at last winter's community fair. It was the morning Grant had quietly lifted his camera, mid-conversation, and caught her smile without her knowing. That photo hung now in the new community room, a simple frame, wooden, no gloss. In it, Claire stood behind a folding table, pouring cocoa into paper cups while snow drifted behind her. Her cheeks were flushed, her hair wine-tossed. She wasn't posing. She wasn't trying. She was just there wholly, warmly, seen, beneath the image. A small engraved caption read, "Being seen is a basic need." It had been Grant's idea, but she'd chosen the words. Now, as she looked around the bustling lobby, people carrying boxes, a toddler dragging a blanket, a teenage boy holding a potted fern like treasure, she realized the phrase wasn't just about her, it belonged to all of them. The hum of the building's lights filled the space familiar, steady, almost nostalgic. She smiled to herself at the sound. Behind her, she felt him approach before she saw him, the quiet confidence of his footsteps, the pause at her shoulder. Grant stood beside her, hands in his coat pockets, watching the same scene unfold. "We promised 120, he said softly. "We delivered 120. You did," she said. He shook his head. "We did. You kept me honest. That's rarer than talent." Claire turned to look at him. He wasn't the same man who'd hidden behind deadlines and glass walls. The change wasn't loud, but it was everywhere in the looseness of his posture, in the faint lines near his eyes that came from real laughter, not stress. He noticed her gaze and raised an eyebrow. "What? You look lighter?" she said. "Like you finally learned how to stand in sunlight." He smiled, a little sheepishly. "Guess I had a good teacher." Someone called her name from across the room, one of the new residents asking where to find the mailboxes. She gave quick directions, then turned back. "It's strange," she said. "All this time, I used to think light came from outside, but it's the people, isn't it? They bring it with them." He nodded slowly. "That's what I missed for years. The light's never the problem. It's the walls we build against it." They stood there a moment longer, watching a family carry a worn couch up the wide new stairwell. A little girl at the top turned and waved down at them before disappearing inside her new home. Grant exhaled, voice barely above a whisper. This is what it was supposed to be all along." Claire nodded. "For them? Yes. But maybe for us too." He looked toward the big windows at the end of the hall, sunlight spilling through in a wide golden band. "Come on," he said quietly. She followed him past the ribbon table and through the newly painted corridor until they reached the glass. Outside, the city stretched wide and alive, snow melting on rooftops, river glinting like 1,000 mirrors. Claire pressed her hand to the cold window pane. "It's beautiful," she said. He stood beside her, so close their shoulders almost touched. "You remember what you said once about the fluorescence?" She laughed softly, "that they always hum." "Of course, they still do," he said, tilting his head toward the ceiling. "But the light out there?" He nodded toward the window, where sun caught her reflection in the glass. "The light out there is ours." She looked at him, the warmth of his voice sinking deeper than the cold outside. Then she turned back to the window, watching the reflection of both of them framed in gold. For a moment, they didn't speak. There was nothing to fix, nothing to hide, nothing left unsaid. Just the steady rhythm of two people breathing in the same quiet. The camera, or maybe the listener, lingered there, on the sound of their breath, the hum of distant laughter, the pulse of a city that felt less cruel now. Light shifted across their faces, and for the first time since everything began, since fluorescent mornings, since fear and silence, they were exactly where they were supposed to be, standing in the open, finally visible, finally home. Sometimes, healing begins where we least expect it, not in grand gestures, but in the quiet moment someone finally sees us for who we are. Claire and Grant's story isn't about romance in the usual sense. It's about the courage to step into the light after years of hiding from grief, from guilt, from the fear of being misunderstood. It reminds us that being seen isn't vanity, it's survival, to be noticed not for perfection, but for our simple, imperfect humanity. That's where freedom begins. And maybe that's what love really is. Not rescue, not control, just the steady, gentle choice to stand beside someone as they reclaim their light. Because in the end, the world doesn't need us to shine brighter than others. It just needs us to keep the light on for those still finding their way back. Thank you for being here with us, for listening, not just with your ears, but with your heart. Every story we tell is a reminder that kindness still exists, that dignity and love can bloom even in the hardest places. And every time you like, share, or subscribe, you help us keep that light alive. You help one more person feel seen, understood, and a little less alone. From all of us at Shining Stories, thank you for believing in the power of empathy and for walking this journey with us. We can't wait to share the next story with you.